In this Part 1 lecture, we're going to cover risk-based monitoring, the data review plan, key variables as they relate to data review, and common data review checks such as ranges, missing data, inconsistencies, and protocol deviations. In the Part 2 lecture, we're going to focus in depth on query generation and resolution. So, how do we know what quality data is? There's no regulatory definition of quality data. In general, the drug development industry expects that quality data is going to be fit for purpose, it's going to be complete, it's going to be valid, and it will have an acceptable error rate. Fit for purpose means the data can be used in the analysis and decision-making process. You have the data you need to make the decision. In other words, that data is going to allow you to answer the questions outlined in the protocol. Data is considered complete if all the expected attributes of the data are present. For example, are all start and stop dates for an adverse event present in the database? Valid data is data that is correct and truly represents the values they're intended to measure or reflect. There's no regulatory definition for an acceptable error rate, but in general, the drug development industry considers an acceptable error rate to be between 0.1% and 0.5%, and that roughly means that you are finding 10 to 50 errors per 10,000 fields. I like this little graphic here. It was compiled by Dixon and Pierce, and it describes the characteristics of data quality in relation to auditing clinical trials. And I think it provides a really useful overview of the different attributes of data quality. You can see, is it accurate? Is it available, complete, fit for purpose? So take a look at these and get familiar with the different ways we think about the quality of data. So what is a data collection instrument? Well, first of all, I want you to be familiar with the term data collection instrument as well as report or case record form. A lot of times you'll hear these used interchangeably, but essentially these are ways to collect data. In order for data to be useful for analysis, it needs to be collected consistently and in a format that can be quantified. Data collection instruments are simply the tools we use to collect required data in a specific format. For this lecture, we'll focus on the most common data collection instruments, those that are in paper and electronic case report form. Case report forms, or CRFs, are designed specifically to capture the data required by the protocol. Both the paper CRFs and the or electronic CRFs perform the same basic functions. They guide the investigator through the process of collecting the data generated for the trial. They identify what data is required, when it must be collected, and the format it should be collected in. But it's important to remember there are many other ways we can collect clinical data. For example, we might collect patient diary data using interactive voice response systems, or IVRS systems. We might also collect laboratory data or Holter monitoring via data sets that are sent from a central laboratory. Proshka provides an excellent description of several common non-CRF data collection instruments, such as questionnaires, diagrams, and analog scales. This will be part of your assigned reading. Your assignment for this module also includes exploring the websites for several vendors who manage non-CRF data, such as LabCorp. These are groups that you're going to come across when you're out working in the industry. You need to be familiar with the most common CRF forms. Almost every clinical trial is going to be collecting demography, medical history, vital signs, key variables needed to evaluate the efficacy and safety outcomes, concomitant medications, concomitant diseases, adverse events, medication or dosing data, and study termination data. Demography, medical history, vital signs, physical exam, con meds, and common diseases are often part of the baseline data that is collected to establish the subject's starting condition prior to treatment. In some cases, this data is also used to determine whether the patient meets the inclusion and exclusion criteria for the protocol. Vital signs, physical exam, ConMed, and ConDisease data may also be collected throughout the study, so it can be compared with the baseline for possible safety concerns or changes. The key variables for safety and efficacy outcomes will be determined by the protocol and the analysis plans. Adverse event and dosing data should be collected at each visit to review for safety and protocol compliance. The study termination data tells us when and how the patient ended their participation in the trial and whether their data can be considered to reflect compliance with the protocol or simply an intent to treat. The University of Wisconsin has a really nice set of CRF templates. One of your assignments is to explore these and see examples of the basic forms and fields, because you'll see these in almost every study you work on. Trial and Error has developed a set of principles for good CRF design. So over the years, various organizations have learned that when you are designing or if you are evaluating a case report form to see if it's a good one, you need to keep in mind that the primary goal is to collect all the data required by the protocol in such a way that it can be analyzed according to the protocol and the statistical analysis plan. Collect what you need to collect, resist the impulse to collect unneeded data, and remember, collecting and validating data is time-consuming and expensive. If the data is not going to support your analysis plan, do not collect it. But how do we know what data is required? What do we need to collect? Well, you read the protocol and you review the analysis plan. Specifically, we look at a visit or assessment matrix that tells us what tests are done when. That lets us determine what assessments need to be done and how many times we need to collect them. We also can review the key or critical variables that will be evaluated for primary and secondary outcome measures. Again, this will all be outlined in the protocol and or the analysis plan. And finally, don't forget to collect basic demography and baseline data, as we discussed in the earlier slides. This might not be defined in the protocol, but you know that you need to collect it anyway. It's a sort of a given. We want to avoid collecting duplicate data. I have two examples here. The demography ECRF asks that you enter both the date of birth and the subject's age. Down below, the drug accountability ECRF asks that you enter the number of pills dispensed, the number of pills taken, and then the number of pills missed. In each of these cases, we're setting up the potential for human error, both in recording the original data on the source document and when transcribing that data into the ECRF. The site staff might miscalculate the age or the number of missed doses. The entry operator might enter the wrong number in either field. Human error will result in the entry of responses that don't match. You'll then be obligated to identify and resolve any discrepancies between the responses. This is time-consuming, and it doesn't improve the overall quality of the data. A better approach is to collect that key data and then utilize programs to calculate or derive the secondary value. For example, it's easy to write a program that will consistently calculate the patient's age based on their date of birth, or consistently calculate the number of missed doses by subtracting those taken from those dispensed. How do we document the connection between the fields we've got on the case report form and the fields we'll be using in the database? Typically, this is done by creating an annotated case report form. A blank copy of a paper case report form is annotated by noting the variable names next to the CRF field it'll be associated with. This example is provided by the CDISC Standards Group. The bolded text in parentheses are the variable names that will be used when programming the database. For example, in question 1, were there any medications taken? That'll be recorded as variable CYMN. Some organizations record additional information on their annotated CRF, such as whether they're using hard or soft ranges, or whether they've said a field is response required. When naming database fields or variables, it's helpful to use consistent and self-evident naming conventions. For example, you might want to start all fields on the vital signs form with the prefix VS, or you could choose to use the root DAT for all date fields, such as AE start DAT or AE stop DAT. Using consistent and self-evident variable names will reduce the possibility your staff will confuse the variables, and it'll speed up the study management tasks, such as writing edit checks or other programs. The annotated CRF will be used to design the database and to develop the data management and analysis programs that will support the study. It's important that the annotated CRF be up-to-date and easily accessible. Any changes to the CRF or database should result in an update to the annotated CRF. And a copy of the annotated CRF should be stored in the data management files and in the trial master file upon study completion. So what are some common data management documents? Well, I want to talk about 4 broad categories. The first is Standard Operating Procedures, or SOPs. We'll discuss SOPs in depth in Module 9, but for this module, it'll help you to understand what an SOP is and how it differs from department guidelines or project-specific documents. SOPs are Standard Operating Procedures. SOPs are required by ICH E6 Section 5.1.1, which states that the sponsor is responsible for implementing and maintaining quality assurance and quality control systems with written SOPs. And I've just got a little graphic image here of part of an SOP so you can sort of see the bits of information on it. We also have Department Operating Procedures, or DOPs. Sometimes these are called work instructions or guidelines as well. DOPs are not required by ICH E6, but many companies find it useful to create documents that detail processes utilized to perform the tasks required in the SOP. Why 2 different documents or level of documents? Well, SOPs typically require very strong change control procedures. Modifying or deviating from an SOP requires stringent review and approval. So you want to limit the information you've got in an SOP so you're not constantly having to update the document in order to reflect a change or a current practice. Now, DOPs can be modified and approved at a department level. This means they can be more detailed and are often used as the basis for training documents. And then we have project-specific documents. The data management plan is a good example. It's not an SOP or a DOP. Remember, SOPs and DOPs outline procedures which are used for all projects. But each project is going to have unique tasks and data handling needs that are dictated by the protocol and analysis plan. So a cardiac study may use data from a central lab, while a phase 2 oncology trial may be receiving pathology reports from small local pathology labs. The data management plan and the documents it contains are going to handle the specific procedures needed for that unique study, such as handling the lab data. And then we have contractual documents. Unless you're working for a sponsor or a researcher who's handling all aspects of the trial themselves, you're going to find yourself contracting to work with other individuals or companies. There will be written documents that outline the work to be done, the time frame it has to be done in, and who's responsible for each task. This may be a master service agreement between a sponsor and the CRO, or a site contract, or the project scope of work. So what is the purpose of data management documents, and why do we create them? Well, the Society for Clinical Data Management notes, every clinical study should have a data management plan to ensure and document adherence to good clinical data management practices for all phases of the study. Although the clinical data manager will not personally perform all the tasks or prepare all the sections of the data management plan described in the chapter, the data manager should ensure all of these tasks and sections are completed according to good clinical data management practices. A data management plan or a data handling plan, it simply documents the data management activities that are going to be conducted for a specific project. In particular, you want to think about compliance with both good clinical practice, or GCP, the protocol, and the contract. There are no regulations requiring a data management plan. However, the use of the data management plan and its documentation is considered general practice within our industry. Sponsors and auditors will expect you to have a data management plan. Furthermore, they'll expect the plan conforms to the general format proposed by the SCDM. PROSHCA provides a DMP outline, including the elements recommended by the SCDM in Appendix A. For most of you, that's going to be pages 235 and 238 of your textbook. You're going to be assigned to read through that and get familiar with it. We also want a data management document because of consistency issues. If there's no regulatory requirement, why are the data management plans the industry standard? It's because many people will work on or with the data for a project. In order for that data to be consistent, it needs to be handled consistently. The data management documents outline how the data is going to be managed so that every member of the data management team will be following the same procedures. We also need just general documentation. The data management plan is going to document the data was handled in accordance with good clinical practice. For example, a quick review of the plan can provide evidence that access to the data was limited to trained and authorized individuals. And remember, studies can take years to complete. Often data management staff leave their positions or the project prior to the completion of the study. Or a study may go dormant for some time, only to be accessed again years after the data management is complete. In both cases, staff new to the study will be utilizing the data management plan and the data management documents to determine how the data should be and was handled. We're going to start talking about the document control and data entry instructions now, and I want to insert a little reminder here that project-specific instructions need to be in place before you begin the task. So make sure you have the appropriate signatures or approvals that are required by SOP or by contract, and document that the training on these instructions occurred. There are regs that bind both the investigator and the sponsor to retain documents that basically tell you important facts about the study that they're running. In addition to that, many companies have standards for creating, maintaining, and retaining all study documents. Many companies are going to document these standards, again, in an SOP. Make sure you know the standards for your company. But there are some industry-wide best practices that you should be aware of. Try to use a standard format. Most companies have templates in place for common documents. I'll post a sample of some template documents used by non-profit data management groups so you can see what I mean. Some templates simply provide a shell with common section headers. Other templates include prompting text to remind you what needs to go in each section. First and foremost, study documents need to be in place prior to starting the work. In other words, you don't write the data entry instructions after you've entered all the patient data. Instead, you write the data entry instructions before you begin entry, and then you update them as you add new policies. It's given that at some point you're going to need to modify or update your study documents. When that happens, you'll need to implement some version control. Essentially, you need to be certain every team member is using the current version of the document, not an old, outdated, or superseded one. You also need a plan for retaining the documents you produce. The plan needs to state what's going to be retained, how it's going to be retained, for example, hard copy or digital, where it will be retained, and how long it will be retained for. 2 years, 5 years? Is it after the end of the study or after the product's approved? For example, your company might have an SOP that lists all data management documents that must be retained, and it states they'll be retained as hard copies in an environmentally secure, access-controlled location for a period of 3 years after the approval of a product. Another company might have a different set of standards. Here are 2 text examples from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease Division's record retention policy, just to give you a taste for what people look at. Let's take a deeper look at the Data Management Plan, or DMP. The Data Management Plan needs to address the work that will be performed, who will do that work, what SOPs or guidelines are going to apply, and what documentation or output will be produced or collected. PROSHCA includes an excellent outline of a comprehensive data management plan in Appendix A. So you'll be reviewing that again as part of your assigned reading. But as a quick reference, the DNP should include all of these items. It should address CRF creation, database design build, edit check specs, database testing and release, workflow, document control, data entry, data review, etc.